Welcome back to Strasbourg, where we're going to use a little bit of bonus time, in effect, to examine Nick on Frankfurt School Economics, something that you touch upon. A lot of people want to talk about it. They want you to explain, but normally we don't have the time. Because we've got a bonus 10 or 15 minutes here, I thought we'd take the opportunity to put you under the spotlight and ask exactly what are you on about.
Yes, Simon, well, really and truly 10 minutes doesn't do it justice.
No.
But it's a start anyway. A lot of our people have got the fact that there's this school of thought arising from the Frankfurt School, which is having a catastrophically destructive effect on our entire civilization. It's behind so many of the problems we see, from social decay, right through to mass immigration. So, in the simplest possible terms, the Frankfurt School was a group of hardcore Marxists who, in the 1920s, 1930s, not surprisingly, were based in Frankfurt. And they looked at the question of why the Soviet Revolution, why the Marxist Revolution had happened in Russia and not in Western Europe. Because according to Karl Marx's theories, communism was supposed to be inevitable, the Communist Revolution, the more the capitalist system advanced. So it would therefore happen in the most advanced capitalist countries. So Marx fervently believed it was going to happen in, say, Britain and Germany and France. And of course it didn't. It happened in the most backward country in Europe. So the Frankfurt School set about working out why this was. And they came to the conclusion that it was because that specifically Western civilization, so not just Christianity, although it was an important part of it, because Russia has that as well, but also the institutions of the more stable West and the national identity of the countries of the West, all these things together, and a legal system that worked, and churches that were respected, and a military that was respected, and so on. All these things were a block to the Communist Revolution. So therefore, rather than wasting their time trying to persuade the workers to rise up in revolt, their idea was that they'd attack the foundations of Western civilization, because once they'd gone, once there was no longer, say, respect of young people for their elders, as just one example, it would make it easier to have a communist revolution. So that's where they started. And so they set about, they decided to do it primarily in two ways. The first was what they called the culture of critique, which was just a system of thought whereby they would simply critique, attack, verbally and intellectually attack aspects of Western civilization, the church, the family, democracy and so on, proper democracy. They'd simply attack and attack and attack, and like water dripping on a stone, would gradually wear it away. And the point isn't to come up with truthful attacks, the point is just to attack. They do it against us, they do it against me. With plenty of this, they just invent whatever it is, and then throw it at the target, and even when it's rebutted, don't then say, okay, sorry, we admit we were wrong, we'll leave you alone. Just carry on with the next lie, carry on with the next attack. So this cultural critique has been running since then against every angle of our society. And you can see it when even quite funny TV programmes mock and ridicule the core parts of our society. And yes, it's funny to watch someone mocking the Pope or whatever, or someone mocking a pompous head of a family. Yes, it's funny, but it's also extremely destructive of those institutions, and it's quite deliberate. Yeah, I mean, this is an updated thing. Obviously, we're not talking with an ideology set 80, 90 years ago. It's something, that modified in the 60s, wasn't it? Yes, indeed it was. Something which began before then, but then was stepped up in the 60s. Of course, their other way of dealing with Western society was to replace the Western people with mass immigration. And the most extraordinary example of that coming out was Frank Field, the Liverpudlian Labour MP, a couple of years ago actually said that in the 1960s there was a conspiracy to do away with what he described as the white race in Britain, and he was part of it, and the Labour Party was part of it. That's a reference to what was happening with this. But as well as mass immigration, particularly in the 1960s, there was a revisionist Frankfurt School developed around a small group of theorists, one of whom, the most important one, is Jürgen Habermas, a German, in his youth a member of the Hitler Youth, because all Germans were, but after the war a hardcore fanatical revolutionary communist. And Habermas and his fellows revised the Frankfurt School in the 1960s, and again they came up with already two key extra ways of working. The first was the idea of building a rainbow alliance of grievances. And so they find different groups, they persuade them that Western society and the patriarchal society, capitalist society, the nation and so on, in some way discriminates against them, and then use that discrimination against them to bring them into a larger alliance of disparate groups, very often in fact mutually hostile and antagonistic, or certainly with different interests. A classic example now would be the way in which the left tries on the one side to mobilise and use the homosexual lobby, and on the other side works with radical Islam, which wants to stone homosexuals to death. There's no principles here, it's just a matter of them dragging everyone they can into this big broad church.
Breaking things down and mould them back together again in a way of destroying what society we've got left.
Indeed. There's a classic example of it in this report, which is the report on equality between men and women in the European Union, where point 61 calls on the Member States and Commission to pay particular attention to vulnerable groups of women, disabled, elderly, immigrant, lesbian, bisexual and transgender, and minority women, and women who have little or no training and responsibility for dependents. So it's as many people as possible brought together, and as a matter of fact some of those groups, particularly in the past, well, women specifically when they weren't allowed to vote, that's a real, genuine, legitimate grievance. Some of these groups brought into this coalition have legitimate grievances. Others don't, and it's phony grievances, but in all cases they're to be exploited in order to turn them against our society. So that was part of it, but Habermas in particular came up with a further utterly revolutionary idea, which is now at the core of so much of what is going on. And this was that they concluded, they looked at why it was in the 1960s that the working class in particular was more patriotic than anybody else. I think this may have come, may actually have crystallised in the minds in Britain, where during one of the 1968 huge left-wing student demonstrations against the Vietnam War, at one point some huge march of these leftist students, Maoists and all sorts of lunatics, passed quite a large body of dockers, and the students were all chanting Ho, Ho, Ho Chi Minh after the North Vietnamese communist leader, to which the working class dockers of London came up with the bright idea of responding Enoch Powell. So they wanted to work out what it is that makes the working class patriotic and therefore a block to the communist revolution and internationalism. And they concluded part of it is that these people, with something like the National Health Service, they feel we're paying into that, and our nation is providing something that we really value. So it creates a bond and a loyalty between people, especially poorer people, who rely, for instance, on the national state for housing, in the case of council housing, or for the health service, or for education. It makes them feel particularly bonded with the state. We owe it a loyalty because it does things for us. And so it concluded this had to be broken up. So many of these improvements, of course, had come about as a result of the pioneering social justice work of, for instance, the early Labour Party, patriotic socialists. But the unpatriotic internationalists see these improvements, which were won by people for the working class of a country like Britain, actually as a bad thing. They want to demolish them. So this is where they come from. And of course, now it's been seized upon and used also by the other people who want to break up the NHS, who want to privatise housing and so on. Big corporations stand to make an absolute fortune out of privatising all the what used to be parts of the nation state and its subsidiaries like councils, council housing, the NHS, education. All this is to be privatised. So you've got on one side, it's an unholy alliance between big business on one side coming in to lobby places like this, basically pass laws. So people like UKIP say, oh, it's all about the EU, saying, say with the post office is to be privatised because the EU says it must, because it's got to be opened up to foreign competition. It's true, there is a directive to that effect, but that's only part of it. The other reason the post office is to be privatised is, on the one side, big business sees the chance to make huge amounts of money, and from the revolutionary Marxist point of view, the idea of the Royal Mail, something which has been around since Victorian times and its origins even earlier than that. It's part of Britain's national identity, the red pillar boxes and all the rest. It's part of our identity, and it's also part of our concept of ourselves as the nation being more than just an agglomeration of people. It's also a family. So break it up. So the Eurocrats want to break it up because it's a symbol of Britain. Big business wants to break it up because it's there's huge profits to be made, and the revolutionary left wants to break it up because it's part of this tradition and part of the thing that keeps the people of each country loyal to and gives them their own identity. That's the war that we're facing, and the Frankfurt School is little understood, which is why I think this is an important piece of TV for us there, but it's absolutely crucial. If you want to understand what is going on in our world, especially in Britain, you have to understand what goes on in this place. You have to understand the naked greed of big business and its ability to buy politicians and buy the political elite, and you have to understand how the Frankfurt School and the far left are working with these people to destroy all that we hold dear. We're the only people talk about it. We're certainly the only people who can fight against it. That is the reason they want to get rid of us. Tell you what, they're not going to.
No. Fascinating. We could talk all day about this, and I dare say you've probably listened to us all day, but we've run out of time, and unfortunately that's the end of this little report from Strasbourg. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you.